If I were starting investing today, with zero investments and a normal income, here's exactly what I'd do before this year closes out. Not someday, not when things settle down, but over the next few months, in a specific order, for specific reasons. I'm not going to tell you to just start investing and leave it there. That advice is technically true and completely useless, because the two questions that actually stop people are which account to use first and what to put money into once it's there. So let's answer both, in the order I'd actually do them if I were starting from nothing right now. Two people can buy the exact same index fund and end up with meaningfully different outcomes purely because of which account held it. So we're doing this in sequence, account by account, and only after that, the actual investment. One quick note before the sequence starts, because skipping it would make this list incomplete. If there's currently no cash buffer at all, meaning a single car repair or a missed paycheck would force debt onto a credit card, I'd build a small starter cushion first, even $1,000 or $2,000, before funding anything past the employer match. This isn't the full 3 to 6 month emergency fund this channel has covered in detail elsewhere. It's just enough so that investing money doesn't have to get pulled back out at the worst possible moment, which is usually right when the market has dropped, and pulling money out does the most damage. Once that small buffer exists, the sequence below is where I'd send everything else. The first thing I'd check, before opening anything new, is whether my employer offers a 401k match, and if they do, whether I'm currently getting all of it. This isn't optional in my ordering. It goes first, because it's the one step on this list where my employer may add money immediately, simply because I contributed. If your employer matches 50 cents on the dollar up to a certain percentage of your salary, contributing enough to get the full match means a 50% employer contribution on that dollar, before considering whatever the investment itself subsequently earns or loses. One caveat worth knowing: some plans vest that employer money gradually, meaning you need to stay employed for a certain period before it's fully yours, so it's worth checking your plan's vesting schedule alongside the match formula. Even accounting for that, no index fund, no stock, no asset on earth reliably hands you 50% of your contribution back on day one. That's why this step comes before everything else, including the Roth IRA I'm about to talk about. Here's the part that actually connects to the before 2026 ends part of this video's title. Many 401k plans calculate the match paycheck by paycheck, which means if you've been contributing below the match threshold for months, that match money for those specific paychecks can be permanently gone. Some plans work differently. They calculate the match annually or offer a year-end true-up that can retroactively make up missed matching contributions once the calendar closes. The only way to know which situation applies to you is to check your specific plan. Picture two people with identical salaries and identical employer matches on two different plans. One is on a paycheck-by-paycheck plan with no true-up, and every month she undercontributes is matching money she'll never get back. The other is on a plan with an annual true-up, and if he hits his target contribution by December 31st, the plan's year-end true-up may make up some or all of the matching contributions the payroll timing missed along the way. Same match percentage, same intentions, completely different amount of urgency, purely because of how their specific plans are built. That's a reason to open your benefits portal today, this week, not to panic, but to actually find out which situation you're in. While you're in there, there's one more decision that sits inside this same 401k step: Roth or Traditional. If your employer plan offers both, the honest answer is that it depends on a comparison most people never actually run: your tax rate today versus your best guess at your tax rate in retirement. Traditional contributions reduce your taxable income now and get taxed on the way out later. Roth contributions are made with after-tax dollars, and qualified withdrawals can be tax-free later. If your tax rate today is relatively low and you expect the dollars you withdraw in retirement to be taxed at a higher rate, Roth can be attractive because you're choosing to pay the tax now while it's cheaper. If you're currently in a high tax bracket and expect those retirement dollars to be taxed at a lower rate later, traditional can be more attractive, because the deduction may be worth more to you today than the tax-free withdrawal would be worth later. Nobody can know their future tax rate with certainty, which is part of why some people split the difference and use both. For someone early in their career and currently sitting in a relatively low tax bracket, Roth can be a reasonable default, but being early in your career by itself isn't what makes Roth better. It's the tax rate comparison underneath it, and for a lot of early career earners, that comparison happens to point the same direction. One quick note before we move on: since the next account we're about to cover shares part of the name, this Roth or traditional choice is about your 401k contribution type. The Roth IRA coming up next is a completely separate account with its own rules. Don't let the shared word Roth make you think they're the same decision. Before I go further, there's one variable that can genuinely reorder everything after this point: high interest debt. If there's a credit card balance sitting at 20% or more, I'd pay that down before funding anything beyond the employer match. This isn't a moral stance on debt, it's math. Paying down a balance charging 20% gives me a guaranteed savings equal to the interest I no longer have to pay, something no investment can promise me in any given year. Lower interest debt doesn't change the order nearly as much. A mortgage sitting around 4 to 6%, for instance, has historically been outpaced by long-term market returns, often enough that investing alongside it, rather than racing to pay it off early, is defensible for a lot of people, though nothing on either side of that comparison comes with a guarantee. The general rule I'd use: debt above roughly 7 or 8% gets paid down aggressively before anything past the match. Debt below that, it's a closer call, and reasonable people land in different places. Once the high-interest debt is handled, or if it was never a factor, I wouldn't immediately race into maxing out retirement accounts if that starter cushion from a moment ago is still my entire cash reserve. This is where I'd finish building a proper emergency fund, usually 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, before aggressively funding the accounts that come next. The employer match is the one exception I'd keep capturing throughout this whole process, since walking away from free money to build cash faster doesn't actually make sense. But everything after the match, the Roth, the HSA, the rest, waits until that full cushion exists. This channel has a separate, detailed breakdown of how to actually build that fund. Here, the point is just where it fits in the order. Once the match is locked in, high-interest debt is handled, and the full emergency fund is in place, the next account I'd open is a Roth IRA. For 2026, the combined contribution limit across your traditional and Roth IRAs is $7,500. That's a single shared limit, not $7,500 for each. And if you're 50 or older, you can add an extra $1,100 on top of that. There's an income ceiling that matters here. For single filers, the ability to contribute in full starts phasing out at $153,000 of income and disappears entirely at $168,000. If you're above that range, there's a legal workaround called a backdoor Roth that this channel has covered elsewhere, but for most people starting out, that phase out isn't the thing to worry about yet. And just so the before 2026 ends, framing in this video's title doesn't create confusion here specifically, a 2026 IRA contribution can generally still be made up through the 2027 tax filing deadline, not December 31st. I'm using the end of this year as an action deadline to get the system started, not pretending every account on this list shares the same December 31st cutoff. The 401k match is genuinely tied to this calendar year in a way the Roth IRA isn't. Why does the Roth IRA come before a regular brokerage account, and in most cases before maxing out the 401k further? 2 reasons, and I want to actually explain the mechanism instead of just asserting it. The first is tax treatment. Money going into a Roth IRA has already been taxed, and qualified withdrawals in retirement, including the investment growth, not just what you contributed, can come out completely tax-free. Compare that to a regular taxable brokerage account, where dividends and distributions may be taxable as they're received, and realized gains can create a tax bill when you sell. Same investment, same market performance, meaningfully different amount of money that's actually yours at the end. The second reason is flexibility that most people don't know exists. The money you personally contributed to a Roth IRA, not the growth, just your original contributions, can be withdrawn at any time, for any reason, without penalty or tax, because you already paid tax on it going in. That flexibility is one of the reasons I put the Roth IRA ahead of additional 401k contributions and a taxable brokerage account. Let's make this concrete with numbers instead of leaving it abstract. Say I'm earning $60,000 a year. My employer matches 50% of my contributions up to 4% of my salary, I have no high-interest debt, and my emergency fund is already fully built. 4% of $60,000 is $2,400 a year, so that's the first money I'd direct into the 401k. Not because $2,400 is a magic number, but because that's exactly where my specific employer's match formula stops rewarding me for going further. From there, if I have another few $1,000s available across the year, that's what funds the Roth IRA, working toward that $7,500 limit as far as the budget allows. If there's still money left after that, and I have HSA access, that's next. And if there's still more beyond that, which, for a lot of people starting out, there won't be yet, that's when I'd go back and increase the 401k contribution past the match, before ever opening a taxable brokerage account. Change the salary, change the match formula, and the specific dollar amounts shift, but the order the money moves in stays the same, because the order is driven by what each account is worth to me, not by how much I happen to earn. If you're HSA eligible, meaning you're enrolled in a qualifying high-deductible health plan, this is the account I'd fund next. And I want to explain why it sits this high in the order, because most people treat an HSA like a place to park money for doctor visits and stop there. On pure tax treatment, an HSA is arguably better than either the 401k or the Roth IRA individually, because it gets 3 benefits at once instead of 2. At the federal level, eligible contributions can receive a tax advantage going in, the money can grow tax-free, and qualified medical withdrawals can come out tax-free. No other account in the tax code does all 3. For 2026, the contribution limit is $4,400 for individual coverage and $8,750 for family coverage. And if your employer contributes to the HSA too, that employer money counts toward the same annual limit. So it's worth checking your pay stub or benefits portal to see how much room you actually have left to contribute yourself. So why does the Roth IRA still come first in my order if the HSA's tax treatment is technically better? Flexibility. A Roth IRA gives much broader flexibility because your regular contributions, the money you actually put in, not the growth, can generally be withdrawn tax and penalty-free at any time and for any reason, while the HSA's tax-free withdrawals are tied specifically to qualified medical expenses. For a beginner who values having options if life doesn't go as planned, I lean Roth first. Someone optimizing purely for tax efficiency and comfortable with the medical expense condition could reasonably flip that order and fund the HSA before the Roth. Either is defensible, just know which one you're choosing and why. The part almost nobody uses about the HSA. You're not required to spend that money on medical costs as they happen. You can pay small medical bills out of pocket, save the receipts, and let the HSA balance sit invested and grow for years or decades, then reimburse yourself for those old expenses whenever you want, completely tax-free, on your own timeline, as long as the expense was incurred after the HSA was established, wasn't reimbursed some other way, and you can produce the documentation if asked. Used that way, an HSA quietly becomes one of the most efficient long-term investment accounts available to anyone who has access to one, not because it's marketed that way, but because almost nobody reads the fine print on how the reimbursement timing actually works. Only after the match, high-interest debt, the full emergency fund, the Roth IRA, the HSA, and, if there's still money left, additional 401k contributions beyond the match, would I open a plain taxable brokerage account. One thing worth naming here, this order assumes the money I'm investing is primarily long-term retirement money. If I'm investing toward a goal I expect to fund well before retirement, a house down payment, a business, an earlier exit from full-time work, a taxable brokerage account may reasonably move earlier in the order, because unrestricted access to that money can matter more than squeezing every last bit of tax advantage out of accounts I can't touch until I'm much older. This is the account with no contribution limit and no income restriction, but it also doesn't offer the same tax shelter as everything above it. Dividends may be taxable as they're received, with the exact rate depending in part on whether they're classified as qualified, and realized gains can create a tax bill when you sell. That's why it comes last in this order, not because it's a bad account. It still offers something none of the others do, which is full access to the money at any time for any reason, with no early withdrawal rules to think about at all, but because there's no reason to fill it before the accounts that shelter more of your money from tax in the first place. Worth being precise about the 401k itself here too, since I described it above mostly in terms of the match. A Roth IRA gives you unusually flexible access to your own contributions, but a 401k is generally more restrictive by comparison, though not necessarily completely inaccessible. Some plans allow loans, hardship distributions, or other qualifying access depending on the specific plan and your circumstances. It's less accessible than a Roth IRA's contributions, not necessarily locked away entirely. Now let's talk about what actually goes inside all four of these accounts, because the account structure is only half of this. The other half is what you buy once the money is there, and this is where I'd keep things dramatically simpler than most people expect. For the vast majority of what I'd invest, I'd buy a broad, low-cost index fund. In an IRA, or a taxable brokerage account, where I can pick anything, that's something tracking the S&P 500, like VOO, or the total U.S. stock market, like VTI. Inside a 401k or an HSA, the exact fund menu is set by the plan, so I'd choose whatever broad, low-cost option is available there. An S&P 500 fund, a total market fund, or a target date fund, depending on what's actually offered. VOO and VTI currently charge an expense ratio of around 0.03%, which sounds like a rounding error until you translate it into dollars. On $100,000 invested, that's roughly $30 a year in fees, compared to funds that charge 1% or more and quietly take hundreds or thousands of dollars annually for often worse long-term performance than the index they're trying to beat. The mechanism matters here, not just the conclusion. A broad index fund doesn't try to identify the handful of future winners ahead of time. It owns hundreds of companies, or, in the case of a total market fund, thousands, in proportion to their size, and captures the market's overall growth without paying a manager to make bets that, on average, underperform the index itself over long periods. VOO and VTI specifically differ only in scope. VOO tracks roughly 500 leading large-cap U.S. companies through the S&P 500, while VTI covers nearly the entire U.S. stock market, including smaller companies, and historically, the difference in return between the two has been small enough that the choice comes down to preference, not a meaningful financial edge either way. Here's a mental model that made this click for me the first time someone explained it well. Think of the stock market less like a casino and more like the collective output of every major company in the country, working every day to become more valuable, sell more, and earn more. An index fund is a claim on a slice of that entire collective effort, not a bet on any single piece of it. That's a fundamentally different thing than picking individual stocks, and it's why broad index investing has historically been extremely difficult for active managers to beat consistently over long periods, professionals included. While anticipate a question here rather than wait for it in the comments. What about bonds or international stocks? Both are legitimate pieces of a more diversified portfolio, and neither is wrong to include. Bonds tend to smooth out volatility at the cost of some long-term return, which matters more the closer someone is to needing the money. International funds spread exposure beyond the U.S. economy specifically, which has both protected and cost investors at different points in history, depending on which region led and which lagged in a given decade. For someone starting from zero, though, I wouldn't let either of those decisions delay getting started. A single broad U.S. index fund can be a perfectly reasonable place to begin while you learn more about whether bonds or international diversification belong in the mix, especially early on, when the biggest driver of the outcome isn't which specific funds are chosen, it's whether money is going in consistently at all. If picking and adjusting funds isn't something you want to think about at all, a target date index fund is worth knowing about too. It holds a mix of U.S. stocks, international stocks, and bonds in one fund, and automatically shifts that mix to be more conservative as you get closer to the date in the fund's name. Bonds and international exposure are refinements, and a target date fund is one way to get them without doing the mixing yourself. Neither is something worth stalling the first contribution over. I want to be precise about something here rather than vague. The S&P 500 has historically averaged something in the range of 10% annually before inflation over long stretches of its history. That is not a promise, not a guarantee, and not something you should expect in any single year. Some years the market is up 30%, some years it's down 20%, and the 10% figure only shows up when you zoom out over decades, not months. Anyone telling you what the market will do this year, or predicting a specific return with confidence, is guessing, regardless of how official they sound. Once the account and the investment are chosen, the last piece is timing. And this is where I do something that feels almost too simple after everything else we've covered. I would automate a fixed contribution on a fixed schedule into that index fund and then leave it alone. Not because timing doesn't matter, but because trying to time it yourself is a losing game for almost everyone who attempts it, professionals included. Let's run a quick experiment. Imagine two investors, each with $10,000 to put into the market this year. The first invests it all on day one and does nothing else. The second waits for a dip, watches the market for months looking for the right entry point, and ends up investing gradually, or waiting so long that most of the year's gains happen without them in the market at all. Historically, investing the full amount immediately has outperformed waiting for a better entry point more often than not, simply because the market spends more time going up than down over any meaningful stretch of time. That doesn't mean lump sum investing is always the right call. If the $10,000 is genuinely long-term investable money, separate from the cash cushion and emergency fund we already covered, but putting all of it in at once would make you panic at the first downturn, spreading it out over several months is a reasonable trade of a small amount of expected return for real peace of mind. But for ongoing paycheck contributions, the version most people are actually doing, the answer is simpler. Automate it, invest it the same day it arrives, and stop trying to guess the market's next move. Let's talk about the mistakes I'd actively avoid. The first is picking individual stocks before the foundation is built. There's nothing wrong with owning individual companies once you have real investing experience and a diversified base underneath it, but starting there is taking on enormous, unnecessary risk for a return that historically, on average, hasn't beaten the index anyway. The second is checking the account daily, which doesn't give you useful information. It just creates anxiety that tempts you to make short-term decisions about a long-term asset. The third is overcomplicating the portfolio before there's a reason to. I've seen people open 6 different funds trying to build the perfect allocation before they've even funded their first $1,000. 1 or 2 broad index funds is enough for the vast majority of people, for a very long time. Complexity doesn't create better returns. It mostly creates more chances to make a mistake. The 4th mistake is treating this as a decision made once and never revisited. That doesn't mean checking daily. I just said not to do that. It means a scheduled once-a-year look to confirm the automation is still running, the contribution percentage still makes sense against a current salary, and nothing about the accounts has quietly changed, like an old 401k from a previous job sitting in an expensive default fund nobody's looked at in years. On that note, if there's a 401k sitting with a previous employer right now, the move isn't automatically to roll it over. Some old plans have excellent low-fee institutional funds or protections worth keeping. The actual task is simpler than picking a default answer. Compare the fees, the investment options, and the withdrawal rules of leaving it where it is against rolling it into your new employer's plan or into an IRA, and make an active choice instead of just forgetting the account exists. That single annual check catches real problems. Daily checking doesn't catch anything except your own anxiety. I also want to address something directly because I think it's the real reason so many people who intend to do exactly this list end up not doing it before the year is out. It's not confusion about the accounts. It's the pull toward waiting for January 1st for a fresh start, as if investing needs a symbolic beginning to count. It doesn't. And here's a number to make that concrete instead of vague. Say someone starts investing $200 a month right now in what's left of this year versus someone who waits until January to start fresh. Over a single year, the gap between those two starting points is small, but compounding doesn't care about your reasons for waiting, and extended out over 30 years at something resembling historical average returns, a few months of earlier starting time can turn into thousands of dollars of difference, purely because that money had more years to compound. The habit of waiting for the right moment doesn't cost you the market's performance during the wait. It costs you compounding on money that could have been working the entire time instead of sitting on the sidelines waiting for permission. So here's the actual sequence, put together exactly as I'd walk through it starting today. A small cash cushion first if there isn't one already. Then the full employer 401k match. Check your contribution percentage against the match formula this week if you're leaving free money on the table. Then high-interest debt if it's sitting above roughly 7 or 8%. Then a full emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of essential expenses, built out from that starter cushion, with the match still running throughout. Then the Roth IRA, funded as close to the $7,500 limit as the budget allows. Then the HSA, if there's eligibility, with the understanding that either the Roth or the HSA can reasonably go first depending on whether flexibility or tax efficiency matters more to you. Then, if there's still money left, additional 401k contributions beyond the match. And only after all of that, a taxable brokerage account for whatever's left. Inside each account, I'd choose the broadest, lowest cost option available on that account's menu. An S&P 500 fund, a total market fund, or a target date fund, automated on the same schedule as your paycheck, then left alone. No stock picking before the foundation exists, no daily checking, no 6-fund portfolio before the first fund is even fully funded. None of this requires predicting the market, timing a dip, or having some insider read on where the economy is headed next. It requires doing the boring, mechanical parts in the right order, then getting out of your own way long enough for the accounts to do what they're actually designed to do. And that's the part that generalizes regardless of income, age, or how much you have to start with. It's less exciting to say out loud than, here's the stock that's about to explode, which is exactly why so much investing content skips right past it. But for the overwhelming majority of people, it is the whole strategy, dressed up in different account names. One more version of this same instinct worth naming. Waiting until you have more to invest before you start. $100 invested today has more years to compound than that same $100 invested 5 years from now. So don't let a small starting amount convince you that starting isn't worthwhile. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, the actual mechanics, not just the motivational version, that's what this channel is built around. I go through personal finance and investing step by step, the way I wish someone had explained it to me the first time. If that's helpful, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Because I'll start investing eventually, and I'll start investing this month in this order, in these accounts, are two completely different plans. Only one of them actually happens.